What happens when a franchise built on hope suddenly realizes the dream is dying and decides to cash out before it's too late? The Vancouver Canucks find themselves at a crossroads that no fan base wants to witness. The agonizing transition from contender to seller. After years of promising their loyal supporters that this is the year, management has reportedly opened the vault, signaling to the entire league that their pending unrestricted free agents, and potentially more, are available for the right price. But here's where this story gets absolutely fascinating. We're not just talking about rental players and expiring contracts. Whispers are circulating about core pieces, franchise cornerstones, and even the unthinkable, their captain, Quinn Hughes. Let me be crystal clear from the outset. This isn't your typical deadline fire sale. This is a franchise reevaluation happening in real time with Jim Rutherford, a man whose reputation for aggressive roster moves precedes him like a storm warning, holding the keys to Vancouver's future. The question isn't whether moves will be made. The question is how dramatic those moves will be and whether Canucks fans are prepared for the emotional devastation that could follow. Let's start with the player everyone's talking about, Kefir Sherwood. At 30 years old, this gritty left winger has become the unlikely centerpiece of Vancouver's trade discussions, and frankly, it's not hard to understand why. Leading the Canucks with 12 goals while carrying a ridiculously team-friendly $1.5 million cap hit, Sherwood represents exactly what contending teams crave at the deadline: affordable production with a physical edge perfectly suited for playoff warfare. Sportsnet's Elliot Friedman dropped a bombshell Saturday, revealing that powerhouse organizations like the Minnesota Wild, Boston Bruins, and Philadelphia Flyers have already expressed interest in Vancouver's pending UF ace. But here's where Rutherford's chess-playing mentality comes into focus. Despite the early interest, the Canucks are taking their time, methodically evaluating the market like a jeweler appraising diamonds under magnification. According to RG.org's James Murphy, citing an NHL source, the Bruins have already made contact about Sherwood, and intriguingly about Connor Garland as well. The New York Islanders, Buffalo Sabres, and Detroit Red Wings have also reportedly registered their interest in Sherwood. That's 5 teams we know about publicly. Imagine how many are working behind the scenes, waiting for the right moment to pounce. TSN's Chris Johnston provided perhaps the most insightful analysis of Sherwood's situation. He noted Rutherford's well-documented history of making moves well ahead of the March 6 trade deadline, but suggested Vancouver might benefit from patience this time. Why? Because if Sherwood maintains his current production level through February, he could command a first-round pick, the kind of asset that can transform a franchise's future. Think about that for a moment. A 30-year-old journeyman winger who's never been considered elite could fetch a first-round selection simply because he's playing the best hockey of his career at exactly the right time. That's the beauty and brutality of the NHL trade market. Timing is everything, and Sherwood's timing couldn't be more perfect. However, Johnston raises a compelling counterpoint. Rutherford might prefer a young, NHL-ready player who can contribute immediately rather than waiting 2 to 3 years for a draft pick to develop. This philosophical difference could determine not just Sherwood's fate, but the entire direction of Vancouver's rebuild. Are they tearing down to the studs or retooling on the fly? The Sherwood trade will answer that question definitively. Now, let's address the elephant in the room, or more accurately, the $7.25 million elephant on the blue line. Philip Ronic, Vancouver's 28-year-old defenseman, has somehow found his name swirling in trade speculation despite having 6 years remaining on his contract with a full no-movement clause. This is where things get complicated, controversial, and potentially catastrophic for Vancouver's defensive structure. Stefan Rossner of the Hockey News floated the idea of Ronic joining the New York Islanders, where he'd pair beautifully with rookie sensation Matthew Schaefer. On paper, it's an intriguing fit. In reality, it's a logistical nightmare. Ronic's contract includes full, no-movement protection, meaning he controls his destiny completely, unless he specifically requests a trade, and there's zero indication he wants out of Vancouver. This conversation is purely hypothetical. But here's why this rumor matters. It reveals how desperate some teams are to upgrade their blue lines, and how willing they are to take on significant salary commitments to do so. If teams are genuinely inquiring about a player with Ronic's contract structure, it suggests the defenseman market is absolutely barren. That should concern every team hoping to compete this spring, and it should embolden Rutherford to demand premium returns for any defensive assets he does move. The Ronic situation also highlights a broader truth about modern NHL roster construction. Long-term contracts with full trade protection can become golden handcuffs. They provide players with security and control, but they severely limit management's flexibility when circumstances change. Vancouver committed to Ronic, believing they'd be contenders throughout his contract. Now, barely into year one of that extension, they're reportedly exploring all options. It's a sobering reminder that in professional sports, loyalty is a luxury few franchises can afford. The Quinn Hughes question: unthinkable or inevitable? And now we arrive at the nuclear option, the scenario that would send shockwaves through the entire hockey world: trading Quinn Hughes. Let me state this unequivocally. If Vancouver trades their 26-year-old captain, their reigning Norris Trophy finalist, their franchise cornerstone, it would represent one of the most stunning moves in recent NHL history. We're talking about a generational defenseman in his absolute prime, signed through 2026 to 27, who embodies everything modern hockey values: elite skating, exceptional vision, offensive creativity, and leadership. Yet the speculation persists, and it's not coming from fringe bloggers or desperate content creators. NHL insider Frank Saravalli suggested the Philadelphia Flyers as a potential destination, where Hughes would reunite with former Canucks coach Rick Tocchet. The narrative writes itself. Star player follows beloved coach to new organization, gets fresh start, competes for championships. It's happened before, and it'll happen again. Even more intriguing and potentially devastating for Vancouver fans is the persistent speculation linking Hughes to the New Jersey Devils, where he'd join his brothers Jack and Luke in what would be a historic family reunion. Imagine the marketing possibilities, the storylines, the sheer entertainment value of all three Hughes brothers playing together. From New Jersey's perspective, it's a dream scenario. From Vancouver's perspective, it's an absolute nightmare. Flyers beat writer Kevin Kurz of The Athletic attempted to pour cold water on the Philadelphia speculation, claiming he hasn't heard any indication the club would pursue Hughes. However, he crucially added that he wouldn't rule out management attempting to acquire a player who could accelerate their rebuilding process. Translation: if Hughes becomes available, every team with assets and ambition will be making calls. Here's the uncomfortable truth Canucks fans need to confront. Hughes is signed through 2026 to 27, but he'll be extension eligible next summer. If he indicates through his agent, through subtle comments, through body language, that he's not interested in committing long-term to Vancouver's rebuild, Rutherford faces an impossible decision. Do you keep Hughes and risk losing him for nothing in free agency? Or do you trade him now when his value is astronomical and kickstart a complete organizational overhaul? The parallel to other franchise-altering trades is impossible to ignore. Remember when the Colorado Avalanche traded Matt Duchene? When the Ottawa Senators moved Erik Karlsson? When the Calgary Flames shipped Matthew Tkachuk? In each case, management read the writing on the wall and decided that maximizing return was preferable to watching a superstar walk away for nothing. Connor Garland's name appearing in trade discussions alongside Sherwood raises fascinating questions about Vancouver's evaluation of their roster. The 28-year-old right-winger has a 6-year contract extension beginning next July, which theoretically should remove him from trade consideration. Yet, multiple reports suggest teams have inquired about his availability. Why would Vancouver even consider moving a player they just extended? Perhaps they've realized that the contract, while not crippling, represents a commitment to a player who doesn't fit their long-term timeline. Perhaps they've received offers too lucrative to ignore. Or perhaps management is simply doing their due diligence, listening to all proposals regardless of how unlikely a deal might be. The Garland situation perfectly encapsulates modern NHL roster management. Every player has a price, every contract can be moved with sufficient retention or sweeteners, and no decision is truly permanent. The same front office that extended Garland months ago might now be exploring ways to move him. It's ruthless, it's pragmatic, and it's absolutely necessary in a salary cap league where flexibility is currency. Jim Rutherford's track record demands examination. This is a man who won Stanley Cups in Pittsburgh through aggressive, sometimes controversial roster moves. He's never been afraid to make the unpopular decision if he believes it improves his team. He's traded fan favorites, moved franchise icons, and completely overhauled rosters in pursuit of championships. But here's the critical question. Is Rutherford's aggressive approach the right fit for Vancouver's current situation? His track record in Pittsburgh involved adding pieces to championship-caliber teams, not dismantling struggling organizations. His brief tenure in Carolina ended controversially. His time in Vancouver has been marked by bold moves, some successful, others questionable. The concern among Canucks fans should be that Rutherford might overestimate the return he can get for his assets, leading to either unrealistic asking prices that prevent deals from happening, or impulsive moves that undervalue what Vancouver is giving up. The line between aggressive and reckless is razor thin, and Rutherford has occasionally crossed it. Understanding the broader trade market context is essential to predicting Vancouver's next moves. Multiple contending teams are desperate for depth scoring, physical wingers, and defensive upgrades. The supply of quality rental players is limited. The demand is astronomical. This creates the perfect storm for sellers like Vancouver to maximize returns. However, there's a catch. If multiple sellers flood the market simultaneously, prices could crater. If teams like Calgary, Seattle, or Anaheim also make their players available, Vancouver might find their asking prices unmet. Timing becomes everything. Move too early, and you might miss better offers that develop closer to the deadline. Wait too long, and the market might be saturated with similar players. This is where Rutherford's experience should prove valuable. He's navigated deadline markets for decades. He understands the psychology of desperate general managers, the pressure owners apply to go for it, and the premium teams will pay for perceived difference makers. If he plays this correctly, Vancouver could stockpile assets that accelerate their rebuild by years. The emotional toll. What this means for Vancouver's identity beyond #Canucks fire sale. Is Vancouver dismantling a contender or building a dynasty? What happens when a franchise that seemed poised for glory suddenly opens the vault and invites the entire league to come shopping? The hockey world is buzzing with a mixture of confusion, intrigue, and opportunistic excitement as the Vancouver Canucks have reportedly thrown open their doors to trade discussions involving key veteran players. This isn't your typical deadline posturing. This is a full-scale market evaluation that has general managers across the NHL licking their chops like wolves circling wounded prey. But here's the million-dollar question that should have every Canucks fan either furious or cautiously optimistic. Is management orchestrating a calculated strategic pivot, or are they waving the white flag on a season that still holds playoff potential? The emotional whiplash is real. One moment, you're watching your team compete in the Pacific Division. The next, insiders are discussing which pieces of your roster will be auctioned off to the highest bidder. The anger, the confusion, the betrayal, it's all justified. But before we let emotions completely take over, let's dissect this situation with the surgical precision it demands. Let's start with the name dominating every trade conversation, Kefir Sherwood. The 30-year-old winger has transformed himself from a depth acquisition into arguably the hottest commodity on Vancouver's roster. Leading the Canucks with 12 goals while carrying a microscopic $1.5 million cap hit, Sherwood represents everything contending teams crave at the deadline: production, affordability, physicality, and playoff-ready grit. The interest is legitimate and widespread. Elliot Friedman's Saturday report name-dropped the Minnesota Wild, Boston Bruins, and Philadelphia Flyers as potential suitors. But dig deeper, and the list expands dramatically. According to James Murphy's NHL sources, the Bruins have already made contact about Sherwood, while the New York Islanders, Buffalo Sabres, and Detroit Red Wings are circling with interest. That's not a market, that's a feeding frenzy. Here's where it gets fascinating from a strategic standpoint. TSN's Chris Johnston raised a critical point about timing. Jim Rutherford, Vancouver's president of hockey operations, has built a reputation as a decisive executive who strikes early and often. But Johnston suggests the Canucks might benefit from patience, waiting until closer to the March 6th deadline when Sherwood's value could potentially command a first-round pick. Think about that for a moment. A player signed for $1.5 million, potentially fetching a first-rounder? That's not just good asset management, that's borderline wizardry. However, the counter-argument holds equal weight. Rutherford might prefer a young, NHL-ready player who can contribute immediately rather than gambling on a draft pick that won't help for years. This philosophical divide, future assets versus present reinforcements, will define Vancouver's deadline strategy. The lack of trade protection on Sherwood's contract makes him the perfect trade chip. No complicated negotiations, no limited destination lists, just pure market value determined by supply and demand. And right now, demand is skyrocketing. Connor Garland's name surfaced alongside Sherwood in Boston's reported inquiries, but here's where the plot thickens considerably. Garland isn't a rental. He signed to a 6-year contract extension beginning next July. This fundamentally changes the conversation from deadline acquisition to roster reconstruction. Murphy's reporting suggests Garland might not actually be available, which raises an intriguing question. Why would his name even enter these discussions? There are two possible explanations. First, the Canucks might be testing the market to gauge his value, keeping all options open even if they have no immediate intention to move him. Second, other teams might be proactively inquiring about players beyond the obvious rentals, hoping to catch Vancouver in a selling mood. The distinction matters enormously. Trading pending UFAs is standard deadline business. You're converting expiring assets into future value. Trading a player with 6 years of team control signals something far more dramatic. A fundamental reassessment of your competitive timeline and roster construction. If Garland becomes genuinely available, it would confirm that Vancouver's evaluation extends beyond simple deadline maneuvering into potential core restructuring. That's when fans should really start asking difficult questions about management's vision. Now, we enter truly speculative territory. Stefan Rossner of the Hockey News floated the possibility of defenseman Philip Ronic being available, and this is where we need to pump the brakes and inject some reality into the conversation. Ronic, 28 years old, carries a $7.25 million average annual value through 6 more seasons with a full, no-movement clause. These aren't just contractual details. They're massive obstacles to any potential trade. The no-movement clause alone gives Ronic complete control over his destination, meaning Vancouver can't move him unless he specifically requests it or approves any deal. Rossner's suggestion that Ronic would fit beautifully on the Islanders' blue line alongside rookie sensation Matthew Schaefer is tactically sound. The pairing would provide New York with a legitimate top-4 combination capable of handling elite competition. But tactical fit doesn't overcome contractual reality. Unless Ronic privately requests a trade, and there's currently zero indication of that, this remains firmly in the realm of media speculation rather than legitimate possibility. The Canucks aren't shopping him. They're simply not in a position to do so, given his contract structure. This is where we separate genuine trade possibilities from content-generating speculation. Sherwood? Real. Garland? Possibly real. Ronic? Almost certainly fantasy, unless circumstances change dramatically. And now, we arrive at the conversation that should have every Canucks fan's blood pressure spiking. Quinn Hughes' future in Vancouver. Let's establish the facts before diving into the speculation tornado. Hughes, 26 years old and the team's captain, is signed through 2026 to 27. He's not a pending free agent. He's not available. He hasn't requested a trade. But the mere fact that his name is circulating in trade rumors reveals how quickly narratives can spiral when a team signals any willingness to sell. The speculation follows a predictable pattern. Hughes has brothers Jack and Luke playing for the New Jersey Devils, creating an easy storyline about a potential family reunion. NHL insider Frank Saravalli threw Philadelphia into the mix, suggesting a reunion with former Canucks coach Rick Tocchet. Flyers beat writer Kevin Kurz quickly tempered expectations, stating he hasn't heard any indication Philadelphia would pursue Hughes, though he acknowledges management might explore acquiring a player who could accelerate their rebuild. Here's the critical analysis. This speculation tells us more about media dynamics than actual trade possibilities. Hughes represents the type of franchise cornerstone that teams almost never willingly trade. He's a superstar in his prime, a Norris Trophy-caliber defenseman, and the face of the franchise. Trading him would signal complete organizational capitulation, not strategic asset management. However, and this is crucial, the fact that these conversations are happening at all reflects the uncertainty Vancouver has created by opening trade discussions. When you signal availability, even for depth pieces, the rumor mill extrapolates to your most valuable assets. It's inevitable, it's frustrating, and it's completely predictable. The real question isn't whether Hughes will be traded this season. He won't be. The question is whether this trade deadline approach affects his long-term commitment to Vancouver. Does watching teammates get shipped out influence his decision when extension talks begin next summer? Does he question management's competitive vision? These are the subtle, long-term consequences of short-term roster decisions. Jim Rutherford's track record as an executive is well documented. He's decisive, aggressive, and unafraid to make bold moves ahead of the pack. Chris Johnston specifically cited this reputation when discussing Vancouver's current situation, but he also suggested that patience might serve the Canucks better in this particular scenario. This creates a fascinating tension between reputation and optimal strategy. Does Rutherford stick to his established pattern of early action, potentially sacrificing maximum value for certainty, or does he adapt his approach, recognizing that Sherwood's value might peak closer to the deadline when contenders become desperate and the bidding war intensifies? The decision reveals much about organizational philosophy. Early trades provide certainty and allow acquired assets, whether picks or players, to integrate sooner. Late trades typically command premium prices as desperation sets in and options dwindle. There's no objectively correct answer, just different risk-reward calculations. What we know for certain is that Rutherford and general manager Patrick Allvin are evaluating the market methodically. They're not panicking, they're not fire-selling, and they're not making emotional decisions, whether you agree with their direction or not. The process appears measured and strategic. The teams expressing interest in Vancouver's assets reveal much about the current NHL landscape. The Wild, Bruins, Flyers, Islanders, Sabres, and Red Wings represent a diverse group with varying competitive timelines and roster needs. Boston needs depth scoring and playoff experience. Minnesota seeks affordable secondary scoring to complement their core. Philadelphia is in the fascinating position of rebuilding while remaining competitive, making them buyers for the right assets at the right price. The Islanders desperately need offensive production and defensive reinforcements. Buffalo and Detroit are trying to push toward playoff contention after years in the wilderness. Each team views Vancouver's available players through their specific competitive lens. Sherwood means something different to a Stanley Cup contender like Boston than he does to a bubble team like Detroit. This diversity of interest is exactly what drives prices up and creates bidding wars. The Canucks hold leverage precisely because multiple teams with different needs are interested. They're not dependent on a single suitor or forced to accept below-market value. This is asset management at its most fundamental, creating competition among buyers to maximize return. If you're a Canucks fan reading this, your emotional response likely falls somewhere on a spectrum between rage and reluctant acceptance. The team currently sits in playoff contention, making the decision to potentially sell assets feel premature and defeatist. Why give up on a season that's still salvageable? The counter-argument requires uncomfortable honesty. Are the Canucks legitimate Stanley Cup contenders, or are they a bubble team that might sneak into the playoffs only to exit quickly? Management appears to have answered that question, at least internally, and their answer is driving these trade discussions. This is where organizational vision either builds trust or destroys it. If Vancouver trades Sherwood for first-round pick and uses that asset to acquire a young player who contributes for years, fans will eventually appreciate the foresight. If they trade him for futures that never materialize while the team misses the playoffs anyway, the criticism will be deafening and justified. The emotional investment fans make in players like Sherwood, who've exceeded expectations and embodied the grittiness fans love, makes these transactions personally painful. It's not just about hockey strategy, it's about connection, loyalty, and the stories we tell ourselves about our teams. As we approach the March 6 trade deadline, several scenarios could unfold for Vancouver. Scenario 1. The patient approach. The Canucks wait until late February or early March, allowing Sherwood's value to peak as contenders become desperate. They extract maximum value, potentially that first-round pick, and convert expiring assets into future building blocks. Scenario 2. The early strike. Rutherford reverts to his aggressive tendencies, making moves in January or early February to provide certainty and allow the organization to pivot toward next season's planning. Scenario 3. The surprise hold. Vancouver's evaluation concludes that their playoff chances remain legitimate, and they hold onto their pending UF ace, gambling on a postseason run and risking losing assets for nothing if they walk in free agency. Scenario 4. The expanded sale. Trade discussions extend beyond obvious rentals like Sherwood to include players like Garland, signaling a more comprehensive roster reconstruction than initially anticipated. Each scenario carries distinct implications for the franchise's short-term competitiveness and long-term trajectory. The decisions made over the next 2 months will define Vancouver's direction for years to come. The bigger picture. Asset management in the salary cap era stepping back from Vancouver's specific situation, this entire saga illustrates the brutal realities of modern NHL asset management. The salary cap creates a zero-sum environment where every dollar matters and every roster spot represents an opportunity cost. Teams can no longer afford to let assets walk for nothing in free agency. The competitive advantage goes to organizations that maximize value at every turn, even when those decisions are emotionally difficult or unpopular with fans. Pittsburgh's failure to trade pending UF ace in recent years, watching them leave for nothing, serves as a cautionary tale that every GM studies. Vancouver appears determined not to repeat those mistakes. Whether you agree with their assessment of their competitive window or not, you can't fault the logic of converting expiring assets into controllable futures if you don't believe you're a legitimate cup contender. The question isn't whether this approach makes sense in theory. It does. The question is whether management has accurately assessed their team's true competitive position. Get that evaluation right, and these trades look brilliant in hindsight. Get it wrong, and you've needlessly dismantled a playoff team. The Vancouver Canucks stand at a crossroads that will define their franchise trajectory. The willingness to entertain offers for veteran players, particularly pending UF ace like Kefir Sherwood, represents either shrewd asset management or a premature abandonment of playoff aspirations, depending entirely on your perspective and management's accuracy in evaluating their true competitive position. What's undeniable is that the trade market for Vancouver's assets is robust and growing. Sherwood's combination of production, affordability, and physicality makes him arguably the most attractive rental forward potentially available. The interest from multiple contenders creates the competitive bidding environment that maximizes return. The speculation surrounding players like Garland, and especially Quinn Hughes, reveals how quickly narratives spiral once a team signals any willingness to sell. While Hughes' trade rumors remain firmly in fantasy territory, their mere existence demonstrates the reputational consequences of opening trade discussions. For Canucks fans, the coming weeks will test patience, faith in management, and emotional resilience. Watching beloved players potentially depart is never easy, even when the strategic logic is sound. The ultimate judgment on these decisions won't come for months or even years, when we can evaluate whether the assets acquired justified the assets surrendered. One thing is certain: the NHL trade market just got significantly more interesting, and Vancouver sits at the center of the storm. What do you think about Vancouver's approach? Are they making the smart, difficult decisions that build long-term success, or abandoning a season that still holds playoff promise? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to smash that like button if you want more in-depth analysis of the NHL's most compelling storylines. The trade deadline is approaching fast, and we'll be here breaking down every move, rumor, and implication as the drama unfolds.